Alright, so welcome to chapter 14. This is a pretty important chapter because if you are operating a restaurant and you cannot do your basic culinary math, then your restaurant will fail because you need to make a profit. In order to figure out a profit, you need to figure out what your edible portion is, what your as purchase portion is, what your cost per serving, all that good stuff. And the way we do that is by using some basic math. So I'm just going to kind of go through the chapter with you. I'm going to touch on some important aspects, and I'm going to gloss over some other ones. So, basic math calculations. I am going to assume that you can do basic math, which would be addition, subtraction, multiplication, and division. If you are having issues with that, I could definitely go back and kind of help you through that. But at a high school level, I'm going to make the assumption that we know how to do that, so we're going to just go on. If you are having issues with it or you need a refresher, Chapter 14 really goes into all of those different applications, subtraction and addition and things like that. Review that. So I'm just going to skip through here. Let's see. So, when working with standardized recipes, it is important. It is basically a written record of all the ingredients, all the steps you need to make a particular dish. Any kind of recipes that you get off of the internet or in a book is going to be a standardized recipe. You need to be able to follow this recipe in order to make it. And it's important, especially if you're working in a professional kitchen, that once you, as a chef, develop this wonderful recipe, you write it down so that if you are absent that day or if you decide to move on and that restaurant needs to make that dish again, they don't have to rely on you and your memory. I like to use grandma's recipes as an example. If you might have this really great cake or this bread or this soup that your grandmother makes and she doesn't have a recipe for it. She just kind of goes in the kitchen, throws it all together, and it comes out marvelous. Well, if grandma's not there one day, or if you want to make a birthday cake for grandma and you want to make it her special recipe, you're going to have a hard time because there's no recipe for it. So standardized recipes is really important for us to be able to make this dish over and over and over exactly the same way. So the components of a standardized recipe is just as important as what is in the recipe. Having a recipe that's standardized ensures consistent quality. It ensures consistent portion size. It helps you as a purchaser to understand what you need to purchase. Allows cooks to understand what and how much of each ingredient is necessary. It helps reduce waste because you're not guessing on how much flour you need. You have a specific measurement of flour. It also helps servers to communicate your information to the guests, such as anything that has potential allergies, which would be your shellfish, your lactose, your peanuts and things like that. By having that recipe in front of them, they can kind of see, okay, yeah, this one does have peanuts, so you probably would not want to sell that to someone who has a peanut allergy. The standardized recipes has to or should include these following information. It should have the name of the recipe. It should have the yield, which is the number of servings or the amount that the recipe makes. This is really important in determining how much the recipe quantity is needed. Yield will tell you how much, after you make that recipe, how much it costs to make one plate. Because if you have a batch of cookies, let's say you have 12 cookies that this recipe makes, and it costs you $12 in all your ingredients, that's measured out, all that ingredients, costs you $12 to make it. Well, by using your yield, you find out that it costs you, as an establishment, $1 per cookie. So you have to sell that cookie for more than $1, otherwise you're not going to make any money. So yield is really important in determining that amount that the recipe makes for a lot of different reasons, which is why I asked you last week to jot down how many chickens did you make, how many plates of vegetables did you make, because that's going to help you when you do your costing for your pecan encrusted chicken. It also has your ingredients. What are the items, or the food items that you need to make this? And usually a good recipe will have them listed in an order that they're used. That makes it a lot easier to follow and make sure that you don't forget anything. Also, ingredients must be clearly defined. For example, stating an onion is not specific. You want to make sure that you have, it could be red onion, green onions, yellow onions, things like that. Amounts of each ingredients are also given. We typically try to avoid terms as to taste and as needed. Sometimes I can't help it. People like their soup a little bit saltier, so, it's maybe as you're cooking this soup that we're going to be making for the nafla, you do salt your onions. You do salt when you have your pepper or your potatoes in there. But at the end, it's seasoned to taste. People like a little bit more pepper at the end. Some people like a little bit more salt at the end. So that part usually has to taste. So we're going to watch this little video on standardized recipes.
A recipe is one of the most useful tools in the professional kitchen. The ability to read a recipe correctly and to use it in various ways is critical to a food handler's success. A recipe is a written record of the ingredients and preparation steps needed to make a particular dish. Recipes can follow any format. However, recipes used in operations, called standardized recipes, must follow a format that is clear to anyone who uses them. Standardized recipes play an important part in a successful professional kitchen. They help to control costs, quality, and the consistency of products. A standardized recipe includes several parts. The first is the name. This is the title of the recipe. Next is the yield. This is the number of servings or the amount the recipe will make. This information is used to determine how much of the recipe quantity is needed. The yield is critical to understanding how much it will cost to produce the recipe. Ingredients are the food items needed to make the recipe. They are usually listed in the order in which they are used. This makes it easier to follow the recipe and not forget any ingredient. Each ingredient must also be clearly defined. This could be the color or type of ingredient required in the recipe. Amounts of each ingredient are also given on the recipe. Using specific amounts makes it more likely that the finished product will be what was intended. After ingredients is the portion size. This is the individual amount that serves a person. Temperature, time, and equipment are also included in standardized recipes. This includes the size and type of pans and other equipment needed, the oven temperature, cooking time, and any preheating instructions. The step-by-step directions describe how and when to combine the ingredients. The nutritional information of the recipe may also be included. This is not required, but it is useful. The amounts of fat, saturated and unsaturated, carbohydrates, protein, fiber, sodium, vitamins, and minerals are usually included. The recipe is a roadmap for the cook. Read it completely, gather and place all ingredients, measure carefully, and follow the instructions. This will lead to a consistent, delicious dish for your customers.
Alright, so the video kind of went through all of these portion size. We use portion size to represent to our kitchen how big this portion is. So maybe a 2-ounce mashed potatoes, or a portion scoop, a specific blue-handled portion scoop. When we make our recipe, we should know how many ounces or how many portion scoops this recipe will make. So this recipe, say for mashed potatoes, makes 15 portion scoops, or 15 2 ounces, so it makes 30 ounces altogether, but it makes 15 2 ounces portion scoops. So we know that this recipe, when we are finished, we figure out how much it costs, we divide it by 15, that's how many times, that's how much it costs to put that mashed potatoes on one plate. It may sound like a lot of work, but when we start costing out this week and next week, you'll see how important it is to make these kinds of documentation. Because if you're a restaurant, you want to make sure that you use everything. You want to make sure that you're getting your money's worth, because your restaurant essentially is not a high dollar profitable business is how you utilize all your ingredients and how you use all your scraps that makes it more profitable. So read through these and kind of get an idea of the different types, portion size, equipment, and things. These are the things that should be on a recipe. Now we're going to go down and look at an example of a recipe right here. This is a standardized recipe. So looking at this, I know it's a pizza sauce and it makes 20 pizzas worth of pizza sauce. This is not a recipe for pizza. It's just for the sauce. So it's telling me that this sauce, this recipe, is going to make 20 pizzas that are 12 inches each in sauce, just the sauce. The portion size, each pizza is going to have 10 ounces by volume. So I will measure it out before I put it on a pizza. So once I've finished making this pizza, I should have enough to make 20 pizza sauce for 20 pizzas. If that is not correct, you need to check on your measurements, you need to check on your portioning, because something's not going on right there. It also tells me the tools and equipment that we need. Now also, the procedures here is both in Fahrenheit and Celsius. I do like to point that out because a lot of standardized recipes are used internationally, and America is the only one who uses Fahrenheit as their measurement system. And so if you were to get a British recipe, you do need to learn how to convert if it's not there. So just to keep you aware of that. Let's see what else. We have also here, we have our measurements is in ounces and not cups, because ounces are a more accurate measurement. And let's see what else. I think that's about it for that one. So we're going to go down to converting our recipes. Now, converting a recipe is really important when we need to yield a recipe at a specific amount. Let's just say I'm making a cupcakes and the recipe calls for the yield is only 12 cupcakes. However, I'm having a bake sale and I need 160 cupcakes. And so for me to figure out that, I have to do some conversions. Now, there's a way to do conversions that are quite simple, and I'm going to show you that. So we'll go through and we'll look at conversion formula to change the yield. Now this one is for increasing or decreasing. So you're going to decide how many servings that you need, or what your desired yield is. You take your desired yield, divide by the original yield, you will get what's called your conversion factor. This is a number that you're going to multiply the ingredients. For example, and we're just going to use an example in our textbook. If a chili recipe serves 8 and you need to serve 4, then you will take the question or the equation 4, which is your desired new yield, divided by 8 equals 0.5. So your conversion factor is 5. Then you will take that 0.5 and multiply each ingredient by that conversion factor. And so we're going to do a little practice right now. Alright, so you're having a bake sale and you need to make 24 cupcakes. Now you found a recipe, best chocolate cupcakes in the whole entire world. However, this recipe only makes 6 cupcakes. So to make 6 cupcakes, you're going to need 1 egg, a half cup of all-purpose flour, a half a cup of sugar, a 1/4 cup of milk, a 1/4 cup of melted butter, 2 tablespoons of cocoa powder, and 2 teaspoons of vanilla extract. Now, don't make these cupcakes. This is not a real recipe. I just made this up. It will not rise. There's no leavening agent, but we're just using this as an example. So you also have 2 handouts that I gave you. The first one is basic kitchen measurements, and it kind of shows you some basic conversions, which we're going to need this, so that's why I'm giving it to you. It's great to keep. I would either print them, put them in your kitchen, because it's something that you will reference all the time. And then you also have another one. It's a conversion chart, measurements and temperatures. So if you are working with Fahrenheit, Celsius, this stuff right here, pretty interesting, pretty useful information, especially if you get a lot of recipes from, international. changing it from Celsius to Fahrenheit. So we'll refer back to those in a minute. But first, let's get started. So we're going to need to make 24 cupcakes for our bake sale. So I need to figure out my conversion chart. So my conversion factor, I take my new yield, which I need 2 dozen, so 24, divided by my old yield, which is 6, gives me 4. This is my conversion factor. What I'm going to do is I'm going to take this number and I'm going to multiply each of my ingredients by that number, and it's going to give me a new ingredient yield. So for the first thing, I'm going to need 4 eggs. 1 times 4 equals 4. I'm going to need 2 cups of flour, because 4 times half is 2. I will need 2 cups of sugar. I will need 1 cup of milk. I will need 1 cup of melted butter. Now this is where the charts that I gave you come into play. If you look here, I am going to need 8 tablespoons. If I do the math, 8 tablespoons. So 8 tablespoons here equals 24 cup, or half a cup. So I need a half a cup of cocoa powder. Now this one here is another one. So I have 2 teaspoons of vanilla extract. Multiply that by 4. That gives me 8. Now looking at this, I know, actually, I guess it would be the other chart. The other chart that I gave you is going to tell you how many teaspoons are in a tablespoon. There are 3 teaspoons in a tablespoon. So I know that 8 minus 6, that's 3 teaspoons, or 3 tablespoons. It's going to give me 2 tablespoons. I will have 2 teaspoons left over. So I'll have, shoot, that's wrong. So it should be 2 tablespoons plus 2 teaspoons. Yes. So I was wrong there. So that should be 2 tablespoons. Let's see what else. I think that's all for conversion. So you have converted this recipe that originally makes 6 cupcakes to now make 24 cupcakes. Now there is a handout that you're going to work on, and it's going to have 3 different recipes. You're going to convert them. Some of them you're going to make more than what it calls for. Some of them you're going to make less. So that's what you're going to work on next. So you're going to open up your document that looks like this. You're going to print it out, and you're going to answer the 3 questions. There are 2 recipes, and then the 3rd question uses the recipe from the first question, and you're going to find a new yield. So that is what you will work on, and then you will pick back up on the video when you're finished. Alright, so as I talked about before, US and metric system measurements vary. So the most commonly used system of measurement in the United States is based on customary units. Customary units include ounces, teaspoons, tablespoons, cups, pints, and gallons. Most of the American recipes are written using this system. However, like I said, there are some recipes that you might find that uses the metric system. So it's really important that we know how to convert things. Now, your handout that I gave you that has the conversion, that will help you. And then I will also post this 3rd one that is primarily converting US to metric. And that's going to help you as well. Alright, so measuring temperature. Thermometers are used to measure temperatures either in Fahrenheit or Celsius. And a lot of our cooking recipes that we find in America is going to have Fahrenheit. There may be times when you do need to convert, and if you do, there's a little formula here to follow the conversion. And if you need to convert Fahrenheit to Celsius and Celsius to Fahrenheit, etc. Alright, so we're going to be looking at measuring and portioning. The term measurement refers to how much something is being used in a recipe. You can measure ingredients in several different ways. Most ingredients are measured by volume, and that is the amount of space it takes up. For example, if you're using a 1 cup measuring spoon, or sorry, 1 cup measuring cup, and you're measuring sugar, you're going to fill that volume that's in that cup full of sugar. You can also measure things by weight. So 1 cup of sugar roughly weighs about 8 ounces. Now, this is where it gets kind of complicated when you're converting things, because there's some items, like a cup of marshmallows is not going to weigh as heavy as a cup of sugar. So, which is why when we are baking, more precise measurements is needed. So we will use weight opposed to volume. Other ingredients can be measured by count or number of items, 1 egg, 1 banana, etc. And then no matter how an ingredient is measured, it's really important that careful, accurate measurement is necessary for quality and quantity control.
Hi, I'm Sarah. Have you ever followed a recipe to a T and had less than perfect results? The answer may be in your measuring. Unlike cooking, where you can really wing it, baking is more of a science as much as it is an art. So accurate measurements are key. First, arm yourself with dry and liquid measuring tools. To measure sugar, scoop into a dry measuring cup and then use the flat side of a knife to level off. Always store light and dark brown sugar in an airtight container. To measure, use a dry measuring cup, scoop a generous amount, and then use your hand or the back of a spoon to pack. For powdery ingredients such as flour or confectioners, otherwise known as powdered sugar, use a spoon or a scoop to first introduce a little bit of air and then spoon directly into your measuring cup and use the flat side of a knife to level off. If your recipe calls for sifted flour, sift onto parchment paper or into a bowl. And then spoon directly into your dry measuring cup. And then use the flat end of the knife to level it off. If you don't have a sifter, don't worry. You can use a whisk to sift the flour, then spoon into your measuring cup, and again use the flat end of the knife to level it off. When measuring wet ingredients, use a liquid measuring cup, and the telltale sign is the spout. It's important to place it on a flat, level surface, crouch down to eye level, and pour. What about measuring sticky ingredients like honey, syrup, or molasses? First, spray the inside of your measuring cup with a little bit of nonstick cooking spray. Then measure directly into the cup and watch how it slides right out. The more precise you're measuring, the better your baking results. Now go make some perfect baked goods.
Now that you learned how to measure dry ingredients and liquid ingredients, we're going to learn a little bit about measuring with weight. Weight is the item's resistance to gravity. It's expressed in ounces and pounds, or it can be expressed in grams or kilograms and things like that. The reason is, think of a cup of popcorn and a cup of water, or a cup of flour and a cup of marshmallows. They all occupy the same amount of space, but they don't weigh the same, because water is going to be heavier than marshmallows. Flour is going to be lighter than water. So to find out how much each weighs, you use a scale opposed to a measuring cup. So we're going to watch a quick little video about why it's important to use the scale. Now, this is from America's Test Kitchen. I absolutely love this show, and I gave you guys some cooking extra credit opportunities, and one of them is watching a food cooking show or doing a home recipe. If you are doing a cooking show, PBS has America's Test Kitchen, and I believe it's on either Saturday or Sunday. I'm not really sure which days of the week it is. It's on a weekend. But it is a wonderful, wonderful cooking show that teaches you how to perfect something, because they do it like scientists. So they'll take a recipe for macaroni and cheese, and they will find the most perfect way to make the most creamiest macaroni and cheese, because they've tested it hundreds of times. They've had consumers test it hundreds of times, and so they had the perfect recipe, and then they will tell you why it works, which I highly suggest you check this out. But first, let's watch this video.
If you're not using a kitchen scale, you probably don't realize what a game changer it is. A scale is essential, especially for baking. The only way to guarantee success is to measure dry ingredients by weight on a scale. Let me show you something. When we're not using a scale, we measure flour with the dip and sweet method. Now, even with this method, which is pretty good, we've learned that you can get up to 20% difference in the actual amount of flour measured out. 20% makes a difference. Too little or too much flour can make a cake flat and heavy instead of fluffy, tall, and tender. We use kitchen scales in all sorts of other ways that make cooking more reliable and easier. If you portion burgers on a scale, you don't have to guess if they're all the same size, and they'll all cook at the same rate. Or you can measure ingredients right into a bowl on the scale, pushing the tare button to zero out the weight of the bowl each time.
Now, probably one of the most important part of this chapter is knowing the difference between edible portion and as purchased amounts. Because most vegetables and even meats that we get, we have to trim them and cut them before we use them in a recipe. So when you go to the grocery store and you pay $1 for a head of lettuce, that head of lettuce, let's say, is 2 pounds. Well, you're paying for the entire head of lettuce. That includes the core. When you get home, you remove that core and you take that core out, and that core may, be a couple of ounces, but now your cost of that lettuce has gone up. And even when you start going through those leaves of lettuce, that first outer layer, sometimes you have to throw that away. So that again starts taking away from your edible portions, and the cost for whatever is left goes higher. And it's really important to understand that. So I have a friend of mine who is a wonderful chef, and she has a video that she has filmed for her students about the difference between edible portions and as purchased amounts, and I think it will give you a little bit more visual representation of what it means. Now, looking at some of these items here, you can see that just by trimming it, you're going to use 22% of green beans. Let's see what else. Broccoli. You yield about 65% to 75% after you trim off the stem. So we're going to watch that video, and I'm just going to scroll to really quickly to see if there's anything that pops out that's worth talking about. Oh, celery. I love celery. Celery is one of those things where you may still end up using the waste, but in terms of selling this item for what it is, your edible portion, you yield about 25% of loss. Now that 25% can be used to make stock, which is what we do, but on a plate, you yield about 75% of that celery after you purchase it. So that's when it comes into that discussion between you and your purchasing staff. Is it worth the money to buy a whole stalk of celery and have someone cut it up, or is it cheaper and more cost effective to buy the I guess they call it the hearts of celery? I think they're already trimmed, they're already washed, and you just run out of the gate using them. So that's something to consider. In the long run, you may end up saving money by going the faster route.
Hi there, I'm Chef Vicki Davenport, and I'm here today to tell you the difference between as purchased and edible portion quantities. At the end of this lesson, you'll be able to define the term as purchased quantity and edible portion quantity. Now you might be asking yourself, Chef Vicki, why is it important that I know the difference? Well, unless you plan on serving your customer this, you better know the difference between as purchased and edible portion quantity. Obviously, we've got a lot of waste here that we can't serve our customer. So you need to know the difference between as purchased and the edible portion. The edible portion is what we're left with after we remove the top. We'll take the rind off the sides and the core out of the center. Now, this pineapple weighs approximately 4 pounds, and I paid $3 for it. That's an as purchased cost of 5 cents per ounce. Now, don't worry about the math. We'll get into that in a future lesson. But I want to stress the importance of edible portion and as purchased costs. So as I said, the as purchased cost is 5 cents per ounce. Once we remove the top, the rind, and the core, we're left with about 52% of the pineapple's original weight. That jumps our edible portion cost up to 9 cents per ounce. Now, if you were to sell 100 4-ounce portions per day, 365 days a year, without taking into consideration the difference between the as purchased and the edible portion cost, you would be looking at a loss of approximately $5,840. Is your mind blown? Do you see why it's so important to know the difference? Okay, so that's it for the math. Don't panic, we'll talk about that later. But I want you to be able to identify as purchased versus edible portion. I have a few other products here that we'll talk about. This broccoli, nice big beautiful stem, but you're not going to serve it to your customer this way, right? This is a usable trim, but still it is not part of the edible portion. So this is the as purchased form. Once we cut off the florets and have them ready for cooking, that is your edible portion quantity. Same thing with these canned tomatoes. This is a 26-ounce can of whole peeled tomatoes in juice. Unless your recipe calls for the juice, you're going to need to drain that liquid off. Once you do that, you're left with your edible portion weight. This jalapeno, you're not going to serve the customer the stem. You're going to take the seeds and the membrane from the inside. So this is the as purchased form. The seeded, destemmed jalapeno is your edible portion. Alright, so now I'm going to give you a visual lesson on the difference between edible portion and as purchased quantity. As I stated before, this is our as purchased quantity. I'm going to put it on my scale, and I see that it weighs 14 ounces. Once I remove the stem and any of the leaves, we'll be left with our edible portion, and we'll see how much that weighs. So I'm just going to take the florets off. Zero out the scale, and we're left with 8 ounces. So we've lost almost 50% of the original weight of our broccoli by removing the stem. Again, that's going to have a huge impact on the cost of this ingredient in your recipes. Whole tomatoes to the edible portion weight. This can weighs 28 ounces, but once we drain this liquid off, let's see how much we're left with. Hopefully I don't make too many of this time. Transfer the tomatoes to a container. Alright, let's throw this on the scale and see what we're left with. We're left with 20 ounces. That means we've lost 8 ounces from the tomato liquid in the can. Again, as purchased quantity, 28 ounces. Edible portion quantity, 20 ounces.
Alright, so that concludes part 1 of chapter 14, Culinary Math. And it's just the introduction of how to use math in the kitchen, which includes converting recipes, scaling up, scaling down, figuring out edible portions versus the as purchased amounts. We will get into costing, which is the next section in this chapter, a little bit later. I just wanted to kind of give you an overview of this part of the culinary math, because costing is a whole nother animal and it's a little more intense. So if you have not finished your worksheet for this chapter review, please work on that. It is the one where you have those 3 recipes. Break it down, tell me how to convert it to either more yield or less yield, whichever the instructions tell you to.